Hello, I'm Susan Nash, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit about strategic leadership and looking specifically at steps for developing a strategic plan. So, we're going to look at this from the point of view of a quickly changing context with conditions that are quickly changing and technology. So, as we all know, we're in a world of rapid change, often unexpected change, and we need to have strategic plans that can respond to that. If you're listening to me now, you might hear some like weird sounds in the background. Well, that's because it's the music of the chainsaws. We had a dramatic ice storm, unusual in October, and so people are now in outside um, dealing with the damage. And thankfully, it's not as much as it could have been, but it's a lot. The worst part for a lot of people is that they still do not have electricity, and we're talking 6 days later. At any rate, I want to go through and talk to you about the different elements. So let's look at how we start. So, in the steps for developing a strategic plan, it's a great idea to start with a needs assessment. So, what exactly do we mean by that? We obviously want to align the needs that we have as our organization or our goals to those of the needs in the world around us, and then address gaps. So basically, we can have two different kinds of needs assessments. First of all, for our own organization. And so, what are the strategic issues? Um, and where are we now? And where do we want to be? And then the needs assessment helps us identify gaps. But even more importantly, perhaps, is the need to identify um, what our potential market needs. And that is one reason that organizations often have a strategic plan that fails. They do not realize that their core constituencies' needs are changing, and they just go along, ceteris paribus, everything the same. And before they know it, um, it's there's just a huge gap, and it's insuperable. So it's really important to know how to align what you're offering with what your market or your constituency or your customers actually need. So they may not actually be able to express what those needs are. You may help them perceive what their needs are by having questionnaires or interviews, focus groups, and then also, how are things changing? Are there any new laws, protocols, processes? Those would be normative needs. And so, are there new regulations, new societal norms? If that's the case, then it's important to identify those too. They often change quickly too, often in response to things like global pandemics, but also in terms of our perception of the world around us. So, climate change being one, and ESG being another. So, speaking of ESG, let's look at this and take a very serious and probative look at the new investment guides that are focusing around ESG, environmental, social, and governance criteria, instead of just simply short term profit. Obviously, profit, shareholder return, etc., those are clearly important. Also, survivability as an organization. But the question of how to survive is the critical one. And developing a strategic plan that incorporates ESG is really critical. So here are just some of the concepts that we have. First of all, let's take a look at environmental. So here are some of the bullet points and issues. Some are more important to some organizations than others. But first of all, let's look at sort of the drivers of this concern. One is climate change, anthropogenic in particular, since there's not much we can do in theory about um, tectonic plates movement and things like that, or asteroid impact. I guess we could do something, but not a lot. But the key things are climate change, resource depletion, very critical, waste and pollution. And it's not just a matter of reshuffling the waste and pollution, it's actually a matter of doing something about it. So just dumping plastics in the Pacific Ocean doesn't mean that you're actually dealing with waste, or just because you're not seeing it, or paying a company to take waste and dispose it and burn the plastics and somehow get rid of it there. That's not a good option. There have been some critiques of carbon trade, just as and carbon trading for that reason too, because it just basically enables countries that make money with lots of emissions to just sort of trade and still do it, which is not viable in the long run. Another is deforestation. So those are little looks at the precipitating things. Now let's look at reforestation and reclamation as positive steps that we can do. And then we also can look at water quality, responsible forage. This is a very critical one that's often overlooked in terms of overgrazing, um, rotating fields and pastures, giving government support to allowing people to be able to afford to do responsible foraging. Also, wildfire intervention and understanding why and how the fires happen, whether they're in Australia or Indonesia or Brazil or the Western US. What are those about? Why? And intervening to sort of change the conditions to keep those from happening. And also a strategic plan to the ability that you're to the level and degree to which you're able needs to address working conditions, local communities, making sure that you are a responsible citizen in that community, working at healthy conflict resolution instead of just dismissing the problem or pretending it doesn't exist, focusing on health and safety, education and training, especially in a time of rapid technological change and evolution, giving everyone scaffolding to be able to help people transition into new jobs, not just eliminating their jobs and hiring you. Employee relations and diversity, team building technologies. So as we go to uh, more and more distance and dispersed groups, then it's important to be able to effectively use things like Zoom or web conferencing, or synchronous as well as asynchronous, and also productivity software. Governance, fair executive compensation, including stocks and options, no corruption tolerated, community relations put at a high level, no conflicts of interest, board diversity and structure is critical, and also a responsible tax strategy rather than just a no tax or tax reduction strategy. Also, in the strategic planning process, it's important to have a positive ideation phase. I don't know how much you've used mind mapping. There's a lot of mind mapping software, but there's a lot to be said for just grabbing out the Sharpies and the different colored markers, and do one just on pages in your journal. They're just wonderful. Anyway, so you can see this example of mind mapping. You basically go into a kind of dendritic approach. So each branch branches out, and then just the key thing is do not censor. Let yourself totally flow. You don't have to show your mind map to anyone, but it can help you because the way that you come up with thoughts is often through juxtaposition and also your mind's eye being triggered by the position on the page. So it's just a very, very nice invention strategy. So brainstorming or invention, ideas exploration, and collaborative problem solving. So mind mapping can be done by you individually or in a group, which is great. And then also, it's highly recommended to create two separate mind maps. Mind map one, status quo, business as usual, and then mind map two, that's responsive to ESG. Then compare the two maps and see, are they the same? Are they different? How? Why? You want to trigger a lot of questions. So, as we know, status of a strategic plan really has a lot to do with where you are with your mission and your vision. So your mission is your whole reason for being, your organization's existence statement. What do you want to do? What do you want to be? And then the vision is what will your world or the world look like if your mission is accomplished? Then you have your core values, and core values often have things in them such as ethics, teamwork, goals, trust. Core values may have to do with sustainability, with resources, but also financial sustainability. And then look at your vulnerabilities. Are you vulnerable because of, say, supply chain disruptions or demand shock, lack of data, resources? And those resources could be human resources, or they could be the capabilities of the resources that you have. Now, this is often overlooked or subject to a lot of cognitive dissonance. Risk assessment is where you should not work alone. This should be done with a team and no holds barred. What are truly the potential incidences and what is the potential impact and what is the likelihood? So first of all, identify potential threats. Then you see on the x-axis the likelihood and the y-axis impact. Now, notice in the upper right-hand corner, a high likelihood, so you have incredibly intense impact, and then you have incredibly high likelihood. Then in the red, you must address those. Those are just, must do. Now, if it has a low impact, low likelihood, it's in the lower left-hand corner, and that's the green area. Chances are you probably don't need to really plan that or build that in. I'm trying to think of an example. Well, let's say that you are living in Oklahoma, in very far away from any kind of ocean, and there's like a potential tsunami somewhere. Are you likely to be affected by that tsunami? No. And if you are, and it would have to be such a massive tsunami to affect, well, directly affect you, that would be crazy. To indirectly affect you because of supply chain, etc. Yeah, that would have an effect. But anyway, That's one thing. Okay, so where are we likely to not plan or have cognitive blindness? It's often in the upper left-hand corner, and that's where the dragon keys lurk. A dragon keying is an event that might be perceived as a black swan event, which is like not expected, etc. But a dragon king has been envisioned, but it's been considered so unlikely that nobody really adequately prepares for it. Or if they do prepare for it, they go, oh, it's not as bad as we it's not really that doing that. So there's so much denial in it. And so that's what gives the Dragon King events extreme impact. Okay, let's look at Black Swan events. Black Swan events, extremely negative, rare event, impossible to predict, seemingly, particularly in a time of rampant denial. Later, people will say it was predictable. Then there's widespread impact and ramifications. Examples are the 2008 global financial crash, 9/11, and Brexit. Now, every one of you has now heard that, well, the 2008 global financial crash was totally predictable. And and the thing is there are always people who are predicting doom and gloom. So the Cassandras of the world will always be around, but the challenge is which ones should you really take seriously and which ones not, because um, greed and fear are pretty big financial motivators and decision um, actions that well they trigger actions in the financial world. And greed and fear are are tried and true um, triggers, for example in investment, stock market, etc. And so because we always have that push pull roller coaster of greed and fear, it's often difficult to identify the things that we should really be afraid of and plan for versus just run of the mill, hey, buy this because, or, you know, well, I don't want to go into examples because it sounds ghoulish, but, just things like that you run of the mill fear mongering triggers. So revisiting the planning process, propose solutions, map the current and future business environment, develop a plan for fast tracking the approval process, consider modifications in logistics, responsible modifications, protect health, cut costs, use data responsibly, and automate when it makes sense. So logistics, I'm thinking about warehousing, transportation, having contingency plans, especially when we're in times of crisis. And then have information for effective decision making for all different situations. So develop new repositories, new ways to generate new data to organize, new possibilities and limits to data collected and used. And then also contingencies and redundant systems for security, electricity, connectivity, basic survival elements, water, heat, food, and protect health and safety. So let's look at more elements of the strategic plan. First of all, we want to have long-term goals. But a long-term goal is good, but it's not actionable unless you set measurable targets. And then also in your goals, build scenarios under a variety of conditions. And this will help you talk through and work in a team to have contingency plans for all conditions. Then also strategy. How will you achieve your goals? What methods will you use? And most of all, how resilient are you? Tactics are basically action steps and plans, and they should be measurable in a specific period of time. So keep in mind that smart goals are specific, so they clearly identify the goal. They're measurable, define the goal in measurable terms, attainable, so they're realistic and manageable. What happens if you don't have an attainable goal? it quickly demotivates and demoralizes everyone. Then the goals should be relevant. They should be relevant to you. If it's an organization goal, it should be relevant to the organization. So you don't want to clutter your plan with too many goals, especially ones that are sort of irrelevant, especially ones that are newly irrelevant. And then also the ones that are newly relevant. Incorporate them, be flexible. And then finally, give it a time structure. So are these quarterly? Are we going to accomplish this in a week, a quarter, now, in a year? It's important to structure it that way too. Okay, so let's put this thing together. Your strategic plan needs to have a mission. Again, that's the reason for existence, a vision, the picture of a successful future, your long term goals, we talked about, probably 3 to 5 years, and they should have be identified but be flexible. Also, put together risk factors, a projected business environment, list the risk factors, put together the business condition, the business environment, that should be all in there. Then the strategy, how will you achieve the goals? What kind of actions will you take? And then finally, and then so strategy, it's not just, these are not tactics, the strategy is how. And sometimes why you are choosing to do things in a certain way. And then finally, the tactics, action plans, projects, tasks are broken down into time-based tasks. Now, I want to just end this section by talking a little resilience. Now, resilience applies to people as well as to organizations, and there have been identified 6 domains of resilience, and these have been identified by cognitive psychologists who look at people who are able to bounce back. First of all, the resilient person or organization has a clear vision, a sense of purpose and goals, and these should be congruent with the goals and vision. And then also, you should be able to collaborate. Your organization and you as an individual need to be able to work in a social context, manage perceptions. So, manage your appearance, manage perceptions of others, and manage the perception of your organization. So this is kind of like, we often talk about building the brand. That can be done collaboratively. Tenacity. So the organization that's resilient is persistent. There's realistic optimism and a willingness and an attitude of let's bounce back. And then let's just skip over to the right side, composure. The resilient organization does not go into hypomanic extremes of euphoria or despair or anything. It regulates its corporate emotions. And also there's interpretation bias. So understand and recognize one's own cognitive bias. If there's all or nothing thinking, fortune telling, predicting, all sorts of things that, and especially confirmation bias. That's something that can help people be stuck, keeps a person stuck, keeps an organization stuck. Just seeking confirmation bias. Oh, I told you so. See, this is confirming this or that. Avoid that at all costs. Then also maintain composure, stay calm, and maintain self-control. And then in reasoning, maintain a problem-solving attitude. Be resourceful. Think about different ways to get from A to B. Anticipate and then plan. And then finally, as an organization, the organization needs to be healthy and it needs to be composed and comprised of healthy individuals who mind their nutrition, they get enough sleep, and exercise. So even if you are in a condition or a situation where it's a little bit difficult to get exercise, do it. Go outside and walk and breathe fresh air. And and in doing so, think about the fact that you are making yourself resilient. And your organization can be resilient, adaptive, proactive. So, anyway, I hope this is helpful. I'm Susan Nash. If you have not connected with me yet on LinkedIn, please do so. And in the meantime, thank you. And if you have questions, please be in touch. Thank you.